There are moments that need no shouting. A single sentence is enough to tear your heart apart. For me, it was when my son said calmly over the phone, "Mom, we sold your house." And then a sentence colder than a Texas night wind, "You should go into a nursing home." For your own safety, I stood in the kitchen I had wiped 1,000 times, staring at the black screen of my phone, and realized the people I raised, loved, and trusted the most had just pushed me out of their lives with the press of a hand. They sold the house my husband left behind, sold the memories, the warmth, and the place I called home. They think I'm old. They think I'm weak. They think I no longer have the strength to fight back, but they do not know. I am not the kind of mother who sits and cries in the dark waiting for someone's pity. I am Martha Ellington, the woman who once lost everything and rose again from the ashes, and this time I will rise in a different way. No tears, no begging, but with the truth, the law, and a plan to put everything back where it belongs. If you have ever been belittled by your family, if something that belonged to you was ever taken away, this story will remind you of one thing. When a mother falls silent, that is when the storm is gathering. I had lived in this wooden house for over 20 years, surrounded by pine trees that whispered all year round, with a scent of resin clinging to the air like a thin veil of memory. I had thought I would grow old here, listening to the woodpeckers each morning, the familiar creaks of the floorboards, the lingering warmth of the hands of the man I once loved. But the day Ethan called, everything I had believed to be unchanging collapsed, not with a loud crash, but with a cold sentence that cut through me like a knife sliding across skin, seemingly light, but leaving a deep tear. The phone vibrated on the wooden table. A small sound, yet I felt it signal something ominous. I picked up the receiver. "It's me." "Mom, the house and the land. We sold it." I froze, not from the shock itself, but from Ethan's voice, steady, emotionless, as if he were talking about an old piece of furniture, not the house our father had built with his own cracked hands. "What did you just say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "Sold it, Mom. Lila and I signed everything. The buyer is preparing the paperwork. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, even the rustling pines outside the window warning me silently. Then Ethan sighed, the most irresponsible sigh I had ever heard. "Don't worry, Mom. You're going into a nursing home soon. It'll be better for you there. All the memories in this house, every photograph, every scratch on the floor, every sun-faded line of wood, suddenly blurred as if someone had drained the color from my life." I walked slowly to the window, gazing at the dark green forest where Thomas and I used to stroll every morning. He used to say, "Martha, a home isn't 4 walls. It's where the heart stops wandering." And now, my heart had been thrown out of the very place it once called home. "Ethan, did you even ask me?" "No need. You're old, Mom. You don't understand finances. Just let us handle it." That phrase, "you don't understand," pierced me a second time. I had long thought Ethan was only influenced by Lila, that he still had the kindness of his childhood. But in that moment, I realized my son was no longer the person I had known, or perhaps I had never truly known him. I pressed my hand onto the cold table. "Ethan, this is my house, the land Dad left. You have no right—" "Don't make a big deal out of it," Ethan cut me off. "It's already done." The phone went dead before I could say another word. No farewell, no hint of regret. I stood for a few seconds, then a few minutes. Silence. Deep silence. But not the kind of silence of a broken mother. It was the silence that makes even the air recoil, when the instincts of someone who has lived long and seen much begin to awaken. I walked to the small bedroom, opening the drawer with the old lock. A lock Thomas had once told me to keep for the days when the truth is needed. Inside lay a heavy folder of documents, untouched for nearly 2 decades. Now it was in my hands, like a reminder from someone long gone. I opened it. Inside were the house deed, the will, and a special clause I had almost forgotten. Any transaction involving the property required the signature of Martha Ellington. No signature equals null and void. I stared at that line for a long time, long enough to hear Thomas's voice echo in my mind. I always trusted you to protect what was yours. The wind outside the window picked up. The sky turned gray. The storm was coming, but not from the clouds. It was coming from within me. I closed the folder, placed my hand on the stiff cover, and whispered, "They think I'm weak. They will soon learn how strong I am." And that was the moment I decided. If they chose to step into this battle, I would not retreat. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would be calm as thunder, precise as lightning. In this solemn wooden house, a mother who had been silent for far too long was waking up. I stood there, in the dim afternoon light filtering through the pine needles, with the file on the table like a summons from the past. The feeling was like accidentally brushing against an old scar, not painful anymore, but sharp enough to stir everything buried deep. Part 1 of the story closed in the stormy silence within me, and at that very moment, I knew that to step into the next battle, I had to return to where it all began. This house, this land, and the man who left it all to me. I pulled out a chair and sat by the window, where 2 morning coffee cups once stood, accompanied by Thomas's deep laughter whenever I brewed it too strong. Pale sunlight slid across the wooden floor, revealing every mark of time, every scratch, every small dent, traces no one understood as deeply as I did. Everything in this house had a story. Every groove in the wood, every nail was a witness to a life we lived fully together, before destiny took him away too soon. I still remember the day Thomas said, "Martha, a house isn't something to sell. It's where the heart returns." It wasn't just philosophy, but a promise. And he lived every word of it. This house wasn't built only from wood, but from his kindness. Every evening after his shift at the hospital, I would find him standing on the porch, hands covered in sawdust, sweat tracing down his temples, his tired smile warmer than any flame I had ever known. He always said he was building the future, building a place where we could grow old together, but life didn't keep its promise to him. When Thomas died, I thought a part of me died with him. I walked through each room like a shadow. I kept his last jacket, kept the empty seat at the dining table, even kept the habit of making coffee for 2, though only 1 person sat there. People say grief fades with time, but in truth, it merely changes form. From a sharp pain like a blade to a dull ache, quiet and heavy. A long sigh stretched over years. This house was the place I held that grief, nurtured it, befriended it, and slowly, it became the place where I learned to stand again, live again, be strong again. On cold Texas days when the wind swept past the windows, I lit the fireplace and let memories warm the room. On rainy days hammering the wooden roof, I heard it like Thomas knocking to come in. I never imagined leaving this place. Never. It was my husband's legacy, but more than that, it was the place my heart chose to stay. And yet Ethan, our very own son, declared that I don't understand financial value, that the house should be managed by the younger generation. They sold it without looking into my eyes, without asking me once, without thinking about how long I'd lived here, what I had endured within these 4 walls. I sacrificed my life to raise Ethan, carried him through illness and poverty. I worked night shifts for 15 years so he could have school meals. I sold my first car to pay tuition. I turned down a second marriage proposal after Thomas died, just so Ethan wouldn't have to face another loss. And now my son sold my house? Number, not mine, ours. Thomas's, mine, and the years that cannot be measured in money. I placed my hand on Thomas's photo, him standing on the porch, eyes squinting in the sunlight, My love, I whispered, maybe it's time for me to stand up again. Not for myself, but for you, for us. The wind outside shifted direction. I closed my eyes, feeling the chill brush across my cheek. Not sadness, not helplessness. Something else, harder, sharper than steel, smoldering like embers reignited. And as memories of Thomas surged back stronger than ever, I knew I was ready. They will regret the day they awakened the mother they thought had grown weak. They will learn. Martha Ellington never lets go of what belongs to her heart. The thought of Thomas had barely faded from my mind when another truth, colder, harsher, barer, began to reveal itself. Not through Ethan's words, but through Lila's eyes. Eyes sharp like a blade sliding across the table, measuring every benefit, every dollar, every piece that could be taken from me. And that was the moment the past closed, to open the real story of the present. We should arrange for Mom to stay somewhere, with professional caregivers. Lila said it in a voice so sweet it could melt sugar, but her eyes were ice. Mom's old now. Staying here is dangerous. The money from the sale will help us. Will help her have better conditions. I tilted my head to look at my daughter-in-law, a gentle, calm look. But beneath it, I saw every layer of intention like the dark residue at the bottom of a cup. Lila wasn't good at hiding. She just assumed I wasn't sharp enough to notice. Lila was always the one who said what Ethan didn't dare say. The harshest, most venomous phrases were always waiting on her tongue. Ethan stood a little farther away, unable to look at me. He only repeated his wife's words, like a small boat tied to a post, unable to move on its own. Mom, Lila and I only want what's best for you, I smiled. Oh, I know. You two are always doing what's best for me. The sarcasm was light enough to slip by unnoticed, heavy enough to make Lila stiffen. The wooden house fell silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. Lila turned around, scanning the room like someone evaluating the price of every item. Her gaze stopped at Thomas's photo. Strangely, even though she knew he was gone, she still avoided looking too long. Perhaps because in his eyes, even in a photograph, there was a sternness she didn't want to face. I found a newly opened nursing home, Lila continued, voice smooth. High quality, beautiful gardens, you'll like it. I touched the table lightly, feeling the familiar grain of the wood. I like staying in my own home. Lila froze for half a second, then smiled like someone who thought she had just secured a winning move. But this house is gone already, Mom. Hearing that, my heart didn't break any further. I had already exhausted all the pain the moment Ethan told me. What remained now was a calm coldness, the calm of someone who knows they've stepped into the battlefield and is ready to stand until the end. I realized two things. 1. Lila wanted me erased from their family picture. 2. This land was just her starting point, and my son had chosen her side. Every small moment from before snapped together like puzzle pieces. The way Lila pushed Ethan to take more control over the family finances. The way she looked at me like something unnecessary. The way she mocked my voice when she thought I couldn't hear. To her, I was a burden. I was an obstacle. I was the past she wanted to toss away. And once I understood that, something else rose inside me. Not sadness, not disappointment, but fire. A fire that had smoldered for years, waiting for the right spark to ignite into strength. I stood up. No trembling, no stumbling. All right, I said slowly. If you two have already decided. Ethan looked up with hope. Lila leaned forward, hiding a victorious smile. Then let me see your nursing home. Silence dropped in the room like a shattered mirror. Lila didn't understand what I had just said. Ethan didn't either, but I did. They thought I had lost. They thought I was easy to break. They thought I had nothing left but age and memories. They forgot the most important thing. I had cared for hundreds of dying patients. I had faced death and stayed standing. I had survived the greatest loss of my life, and now, faced with the greed of a daughter-in-law, no, I would not tremble. Lila stepped closer and placed her hand on my shoulder, artificially gentle. You'll feel much more comfortable. Trust me, I look straight into her eyes. Yes, I trust. I trust that you will answer for everything you've done. Just one sentence, soft, but enough to drain the color from Lila's face. I looked out the window where the trees swayed. The sky was shifting toward storm. Part 2 held the warmth of memory. Part 3 opened the frost of calculation. And I knew. I was entering the land of shadows. Not afraid, not stepping back, just preparing. Because when a mother falls silent, that is when the plan to set everything back in its rightful place begins. The moment Lila stepped back, her eyes never leaving me, I realized this battle wasn't just about the house, the land, or Thomas's legacy. This battle had become about me, about power, boundaries, and the respect they thought they had stripped from me. Lila's scheming kept me alert, but what wounded my heart most was Ethan. My son, my own son, was standing with his wife, complicit in an intent that should have been stopped. I do not agree, I said, my voice trembling yet sharp as a blade. This house is mine. It's your father's legacy. No one has the right to sell it. No one has the right to force me elsewhere. Lila smiled, trying to hide her panic. I only want you safe, Mom. You're old. You don't understand finances. Let us handle it. But when Ethan repeated it, his voice deep and steady, without hesitation. You're old, Mom. You don't understand finances. I froze. Time seemed to stop. A chilling sensation crept over my body, not because of the words, but because my son said them sincerely, without evasion, without hesitation, without a shred of guilt. The deepest wound, not the loss of property, but the moment I realized, the one I had nurtured, protected, had chosen to side with someone else. My chest tightened, my heart beat thudding as if it would leap out. I remembered every sleepless night, every time I carried Ethan through high fevers, every night watching him sleep while my heart weighed heavy with worry. I had spent my life teaching him about love, about kindness, about right and wrong. And now he turned his back, not for justice, but for the ambition of a stranger I had never liked. I inhaled deeply, feeling the dense air of the kitchen, the smell of wood, coffee, memories, all compressed in my chest, forming a cold, heavy steel block, yet unyielding. Lila stood before me, face pretending confidence, but in her eyes I read the signs of fear. Not fear that I would cry or beg, but fear of a mother who was alert, experienced, seeing through every scheme. I stepped forward, voice low and clear. Ethan, do you hear me? This house belongs to me. Not to you two. Not to Lila. Not to anyone without my signature. My son looked at me, his eyes hesitating, yet still fixed on Lila. Part of me wanted to shout, but I knew that screaming wouldn't help. The instinct of a woman who had survived countless storms told me that silence, observation, and timing were far more lethal than any outburst. But the pain didn't lessen. It burned within me like a smoldering fire. I remembered afternoons when Ethan was little, holding my hand as we ran across the wooden floor, giggling, believing Mom was the whole world. Now that world was split, one part siding with Lila, the other, still mine, quietly gathering strength for what was to come. I pulled my hand away from Thomas's photo on the table, feeling the weight of memory.
Ethan's words were a knife, but not to cut me out of the house.
They were a knife testing my inner strength, and I knew if I let hurt govern me, I would lose the most important opportunity to restore truth, to restore justice. I lifted my head, looking straight at Ethan and Lila. My gaze was no longer that of a betrayed mother. It was the gaze of a woman who had endured suffering, learned to turn pain into power, and was ready to reclaim everything that belonged to her. "Listen to me," I began, voice low but sharp, like an arrow aimed at the hearts of those who thought they had won. "This house isn't going anywhere. I'm still here, and I will show you that no one has the right to trample the person who raised you." Ethan faltered. Lila's tension became visible, but I only smiled, a cold, gentle smile, carrying a silent warning. Whoever dares to underestimate Martha Ellington will pay. The air in the kitchen thickened. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, bringing a shiver as if warning of an approaching storm. But this storm was not in the sky. The storm was inside the house, inside me, in the determination I had been quietly nurturing. And as I returned to the legal files on the table, the fire of anger began to blaze. Not anger at Ethan, not at Lila, but anger at the way both had assumed they could defeat the mother who had stood strong through everything. Part 3 had ended in the shadows of scheming. Part 4 opened the first light of a silent but sharp battle, where Martha Ellington was no longer a weak mother, but a woman ready to confront every plot, to protect her legacy, her dignity, and the heart that had once been betrayed. After the powerful warning, I realized the atmosphere in the kitchen had frozen. Ethan bowed his head. Lila clutched the edge of the table, trying to appear resolute, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. The air felt heavy, like a thick curtain, and I knew I needed the next move. A move not made with words, but with action, with silence, with the look only those who have endured pain can possess. I lifted a hand and slowly placed it on the old legal file Thomas left behind. I had kept it in the drawer since he died, like a lucky charm, a silent witness to everything we had built together. Looking at the file, I felt as if Thomas stood behind me, reminding me to stay calm, reminding me that real strength does not come from anger, but from intelligence, from preparation, from the ability to see through every plot. I drew a long breath. No crying, no shouting, no rage. I pressed all negative emotions down beneath a shell of calm, because I know anger is only a dull blade. Silence. Sharp silence is like a keen knife, and it is enough to let Lila and Ethan feel the gravity of what they have done. I opened the file, feeling each old page, each seal cut deep by time. Every sheet seemed to hold Thomas's breath, the meticulousness and integrity he had entrusted. I read each line slowly, like someone gathering shattered fragments of memory and connecting them into a map toward the truth. Every word seemed to whisper, "Martha, no one can steal what belongs to you if you do not allow it." My gaze changed. Not anger, not resentment, but the look of someone lucid, decisive, and strategic. A Martha Ellington who had once been gentle and easily moved had become an observer, a planner, and a threat Lila and Ethan did not anticipate. In that look there was coldness and mystery, like a still lake before the storm, certain that the waves will come, fierce and without warning. Lila stood there, looking at me, her lips moving but unable to form words. She thought Martha Ellington would collapse after a few soft phrases, a few threats. She didn't know this mother had spent over 3 decades facing death, illness, and loss, and yet remained standing. I had cared for patients through long nights, witnessed despair, and learned to turn pain into strength. Now, this calm, this silent observation was my weapon. Ethan, too. I could see the shame in his eyes, but what hurt me most was his indecision. He stood between me and Lila, floundering, not knowing whom to choose, yet also serving as a knife testing my resolve. And I did not tremble, for I understood. True strength does not come from others agreeing with you, but from knowing you are right and being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what is right. I closed the file, placing my hand on its cover, feeling its weight. Not merely paper, but power, truth, Thomas's legacy, the heart I had devoted my life to. I stood there, looking at them. My gaze was no longer that of a betrayed mother, but of someone ready to restore justice in her own way. "Children," I said, my voice low but firm. "Remember this. No one can take away what belongs to me. No one, except me." Silence fell over the room. The clock ticked, slow and solemn, like the heartbeat of a battle forming. Lila and Ethan suddenly realized that Martha Ellington had changed. The weak mother they once thought they could manipulate had become a silent, sharp observer, waiting for the right moment to act. And I knew the next step would be where retribution began to take shape, not with shouting, not with tears, but with intellect, strategy, and absolute resolve. For Martha Ellington had learned one thing. When betrayed, nothing is more deadly than silent observation and the power that comes from preparation. Outside, the wind rustled through the tree canopies, signaling that another storm, not from nature, but from the human heart, was approaching. But I was not afraid. I was ready to face it. After placing the legal file on the table, I sat down, my hand still resting on the worn cover, my eyes scanning the faded words through the years. Silence thickened the kitchen, but it was no longer helplessness or hurt. Now, I felt my heartbeat steady and certain, like someone standing above, surveying the ground, everything under control, just waiting for a signal to act. I opened the file, flipping through each page carefully, meticulously, like a hunter tracking the prey's footprints. Documents, contracts, receipts, all left by Thomas, like a silent will, guiding me on how to protect the estate and the spiritual legacy he had entrusted. And then I saw something that made my heart beat faster than usual, a deed, with a special clause Thomas had written, the ink faded but still commanding. Any transaction involving the property must bear the signature of Martha Ellington. I closed my eyes for a second, silently letting the words sink in, not out of surprise, but because the truth had appeared, cold, clear, and immensely powerful. My son had broken the law. Ethan had stood there, smiling, thinking he was clever, thinking that with Lila's consent everything would pass. But Thomas had left me a safeguard, a legal shield. Any action Ethan or Lila attempted now would be void without my signature. I opened my eyes, looking at Ethan standing helplessly before the table, his face a mixture of shame and fear. Lila, panicked, her fake smile replaced by tension, like a caught animal searching for escape. I held the deed before them, my voice calm but hard as steel. "Look at this. Any transaction involving this house, the land, is illegal without my signature. I hold that right, and I have never agreed." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Ethan stepped back, trying to hide his embarrassment, but the truth was written all over his face. Lila turned away, hands trembling, clinging to some excuse, but I knew. There was nothing that could save them now. They had been too confident, thinking a 57-year-old widow would only bow her head, stay silent, and watch her property be taken. But Thomas had prepared me for this day, preparing me to turn pain into power, betrayal into justice. I stared at them, feeling the weight of the words, feeling a power I had never possessed. No longer was I the weak Martha Ellington, the mother who cowered before her children's audacity. Now, I was in command, knowing how to make them confront their own actions. I sat back, flipping each page, carefully checking every signature, every date. Everything proved that Ethan and Lila had deliberately ignored this clause. They thought manipulation and deceit would bring them victory. They forgot that Thomas had left me as a legal shield, and more importantly, as a mother who knew how to wield strength from preparation and intellect. I closed my eyes, exhaling lightly, not out of pain, but from a hidden satisfaction in my lucidity, that finally, Martha Ellington was not defeated. Not now, not by Ethan or Lila. Helplessness, rage, hatred, all transformed into fuel for the next move. I stood up, clutching the deed in my hand. My gaze now radiated power. I had seen the scheming, the greed, the betrayal. But more importantly, I also saw the door to justice opening right before me. Ethan and Lila stood there, stunned. They were no longer in control. Every plot, every plan they thought secure, now wavered under the light of truth and the power Thomas had entrusted to me. And in that moment, I realized one thing. A silent, steadfast, and intelligent mother can shake even those who think they have won. Outside the window, tree branches swayed in the wind, signaling the next storm approaching. But this storm was not from nature. It would erupt from clarity, intellect, and the resolve to restore everything to its rightful place, with Martha Ellington as its true master. Part 5 ends with a piercing, observant gaze. Part 6 opens the secrets of legal power, the turning point where the mother realizes she is not only standing up, but holding the authority to deliver justice and begin her revenge in full. With the deed in my hand, I felt a strange vibration. Not fear, not anger, but a surge of power born from the truth. It ran like a cold current through my fingers, reminding me that now every plot had been exposed, and only one step remained to turn pain into power. But that step could not rely on my hands alone. I needed a legal ally, someone who had known Thomas well, someone who could turn signatures and clauses into a weapon. And in my mind, only one name surfaced. My late husband's old attorney, the man who had steered Thomas's transactions for years. The next day, I drove through familiar Texas suburban roads, leaves turning gold under the wheels, the air crisp as if reminding me of the time that had passed, the time I raised Ethan, the time I cared for Thomas, and now the time to reclaim what belonged to me. I entered the lawyer's office, where the smell of old paper, ink, and wood had become a silent witness to countless important decisions. He looked at me with surprise and respect, not merely because a woman had come alone, but because of the weight in my eyes, the eyes of someone who had known betrayal and yet stood resilient. I laid the file before him and recounted every detail. Ethan and Lila selling the land without my signature, their words, their contempt for Thomas's legacy. The lawyer was silent, but I saw a flash of that strange, thoughtful excitement in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Mrs. Martha, this is clear evidence. The transaction is void. Without your signature, every contract, every transfer has no legal value. Everything can be reversed." My heart felt as if it would leap from my chest. A thrill mixed with cold rage flooded my body, not because I had won, but because I had freed myself from the quiet oppression I had carried for so long. Piece by piece, the fragments of betrayal were being uncovered, and the light of justice began to shine where before there had been only the darkness of pain and disappointment. On the drive home, I watched afternoon rays slant through the leaves, reminding me that every move must be meticulously prepared, never rushed, but consistent. I began to plan the restitution of truth, detail by detail. Each step would be calculated, each word placed precisely, and every action of Ethan and Lila would be answered with the law and the intellect they believed no one could match. Inside me, coldness fused with cunning into a perfect map for what was to come. I was no longer the easily softened mother. I was the strategist controlling the battle, standing behind the legal shield Thomas had left, ready for whatever came next. No more tears, no more despair, only a plan, slow but steady, to restore everything to its rightful place and force Ethan and Lila to confront the consequences of their greed and betrayal. I closed my eyes a moment, inhaled deeply, and felt my strength spread through my body. This was not impulsive revenge, but a strategy to restore justice. A strategy I, Martha Ellington, would execute with calm, preparation, and the firm belief that a betrayed mother who is clear-headed and knows the law cannot be stopped. When I opened the door and stepped out, the evening sun hit my face, making specks of dust glitter in the air. Out there, Ethan and Lila still didn't know the rules of the game had changed. I was not hurried, not shouting, only giving a small, measured smile, yet every cell in me sang. The battle had only just begun, and I held the weapon to win. After setting the legal file on the table, I sat down, my hands still resting on the worn cover, my gaze calm while my mind sketched out the next moves. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms folded across his chest as if to hide his weakness, and failing. Lila stood opposite, her fake smile extinguished, panic flashing in her eyes. They did not know I had just left the lawyer's office, where every truth had been confirmed, where their schemes and actions were rendered void, irrevocable. I knew that the moment I laid the deed before them, the small world they thought they controlled would collapse right in front of their eyes. I lifted the file and slowly spread it across the table. My voice was calm, no shouting, no fury, but every word carried the weight of steel. Ethan, Lila, this is the land sale contract you signed, and this is the deed with Thomas's clause. Without my signature, everything is void. Time seemed to stop. Ethan looked down, his mouth moving but unable to form words. He was ashamed, not because his mother had discovered it, but because of the betrayal he had chosen. I looked straight into his eyes and saw remorse mingled with fear. A version of Ethan I had thought mature, now small and fragile like the boy I had cradled over 30 years ago. Lila was different. She showed rage, like a storm brewing inside her. Her eyes brightened, chest tight, hands trembling as she tried to keep her voice steady. Don't say things you think are true. We did it for the family, for the future. I smiled softly, not a smile of surrender, but the smile of someone who has been betrayed and learned to turn it into strength. Family? Future? You call selling the house without asking me for the family? You have forgotten one thing. This house, this land, and everything we built belong to me. And now, everything you've done is meaningless. Lila froze, bewildered. She had thought that by manipulating and forcing the issue, she could take the house and assets outright, but now every scheme evaporated like mist. I could see clearly that her anger was not about being found out. It was about losing power, about no longer controlling the narrative. Ethan stepped back and bowed his head. I felt shame weigh upon his shoulders like a heavy burden. No explanation, no excuse could change the truth before them. He realized he had betrayed the one who gave him life, and my gaze made him unable to meet my eyes. He stood there helpless, while Lila nearly wanted to cry, but tried to mask her fear. I placed my hand on the file, pressing each sheet. You thought you could deceive me, thinking I would stay silent and accept it, but I was prepared. I know the law. I know my rights. Everything you've done is null and void. The house was so still I could hear the rustle of the wind outside the window, the falling leaves beating like a drum heralding a quiet revolution. Ethan hung his head. Lila stood statue still. But I knew this moment would be etched into their minds. A Martha Ellington they thought defeated, now wielding complete power and controlling every next move. I inhaled deeply, feeling strength drawn from preparation and from justice standing by me. My heart no longer raced with outrage, but with a quiet pride. I, Martha Ellington, stood tall after years of endurance, and now everything would change. Ethan must face his mistake. Lila must learn that not everyone can manipulate others without paying the price. The air in the room was so thick I could feel each of their heartbeats, each rapid breath as if about to burst. Ethan bowed his head, awkward and embarrassed, while Lila stood rigid, clutching her handbag, lips moving but unable to form a word. I stepped forward slowly, each step weighted with the calm forged by 30 years of sacrifice, 30 years of motherhood, and now 30 years of preparation for this moment of justice. Lila, my voice rang out, even but cold as steel. Explain this to me. Why did you sign that contract on your own, forge my signature? The question was not merely an interrogation but a command, a spiritual shove that froze every corner of the room. Lila drew a deep breath, forcing a counterfeit smile, but her trembling hands betrayed her before the undeniable truth. She looked at me, flustered, gradually sliding into panic. All the plans she thought clever, every scheme she believed sophisticated, now lay torn like fabric, no place left to hide. I lifted the file and opened to the page proving my signature was intact. Thomas's clause printed bold on the paper, clear and indisputable. Do you know what this means, Lila? Forging signatures is a criminal offense. You're facing possible charges for falsifying documents. You understand that, don't you? Lila backed away, eyes wide, her whole body taut like an animal cornered. Her heartbeat thudded loudly in my ears, merging with the steady, sure rhythm of my breathing. I knew that in a moment fear would strip her of composure. I stood there, silent, letting her feel the full weight of the words without shouting or further threats. My silence had become the fiercest blow, striking directly at conscience and the deepest fears. At last, Lila could not avoid it any longer. Her voice trembled, each syllable breaking apart. I just thought you wouldn't notice, that you don't remember, that you don't know. I listened, brow furrowed, my gaze fixed on her with no hint of pity. Lila's clumsy explanations no longer angered me. They were proof of the contrived innocence and greed that led her to this abyss. I knew that with each clumsy excuse, she dug the legal hole she could not escape even deeper. Ethan stood beside her, daring not to intervene. I could see his regret, the shame in the way his eyes flicked toward me. But this time it was not him I required to face the truth. Lila had to face it directly. With each passing second, she felt, unmistakably, that every pretense, every calculation, every attempt to use others to reach her goal was being exposed. I stepped closer and slowly pointed to the contract before us. Look here. Without my signature, every transaction is invalid. You thought you could deceive me, but I have the evidence. I know the law, I know my rights. And now you must answer honestly. Why did you do this? Lila trembled, tears welling, but she tried to keep up a strong image in front of Ethan and me. I realized in this moment that fear had replaced greed, and for the first time she saw that her actions would have consequences. No more conspiracy, no more lies, only a direct confrontation with the justice Martha Ellington, the mother they took for weak, was orchestrating with intelligence and resolve. In the silence, I watched panic flood her face, every line, every crease, every glance, each reflecting the truth she had willfully ignored before. And I knew that just one more step would complete justice. Ethan would learn his lesson, and Lila would stand accountable for the consequences of the choice she made. The air in the room was thick to the point that I could feel each of their heartbeats, each hurried breath as if ready to burst. Ethan hung his head, awkward and embarrassed, while Lila stood rigid, clutching her handbag, lips moving but unable to form a word. I stepped forward slowly, each step bearing the weight of calm forged by 30 years of sacrifice, 30 years of motherhood, and now 30 years of preparation for this moment of justice. Lila, my voice rang out, steady but as cold as steel. Explain yourself to me. Why did you sign that contract on your own? Forge my signature? The question was not merely an interrogation but an order, a shove to the spirit that seemed to freeze every corner of the room. Lila drew a deep breath and tried to force a fake smile, but her trembling hands betrayed her before the undeniable truth. She looked at me, flustered, and gradually slipped into panic. All the plans she thought clever, every scheme she believed sophisticated, now lay torn like cloth, no place left to hide. I lifted the file and opened it to the page proving my signature remained intact. Thomas's claws printed bold on the paper, clear and incontestable. Do you know what this means, Lila? Forging signatures is a criminal offense. You're facing possible charges for document forgery. You understand that, don't you? Lila stepped back, eyes wide, her whole body tense like an animal cornered. I could hear her heartbeat thudding in my ears, joined to the steady, measured rhythm of my own breathing. I knew that in a moment fear would strip her of composure. I stood there, silent, letting her feel the full weight of the words without shouting or making further threats. My silence had become the fiercest blow, striking directly at conscience and deepest fear. Finally, Lila could not avoid it any longer. Her voice trembled, each syllable fragmenting. I just thought you wouldn't notice, that you don't remember, that you don't know. I listened, brow furrowed, my gaze fixed on her without a shred of pity. Lila's clumsy explanations no longer angered me. They served as proof of feigned innocence and greed that led her to this abyss. I knew that with each clumsy excuse, she only dug the legal hole she could not escape even deeper. Ethan stood beside her, daring not to intervene. I saw his regret, the shame in the way his eyes flicked toward me. But this time, it was not him who needed to face the truth. Lila had to confront it directly. With each passing second, she felt, unmistakably, that every pretense, every calculation, every attempt to use others to reach her goals was being exposed. I stepped closer and slowly pointed to the contract before us. Look here. Without my signature, every transaction is invalid. You thought you could deceive me, but I have the evidence. I know the law, I know my rights, and now you must answer honestly. Why did you do this? Lila trembled, tears welling, but she tried to keep up a strong image in front of Ethan and me. I realized in that moment that fear had replaced greed, and for the first time, she saw that her actions would have consequences. No more conspiracy, no more lies, only a direct confrontation with the Justice Martha Ellington, the mother they took for weak, was orchestrating with intelligence and resolve. In the silence, I watched panic flood her face, every line, every crease, every glance, each reflecting the truth she had willfully ignored. And I knew that just one more step would complete justice. Ethan would learn his lesson, and Lila would stand accountable for the consequences of the choice she had made. After I placed the original contract before them, emphasizing every word, every clause Thomas had left behind, the room fell into a strange silence. Ethan stood there, eyes vacant, hands trembling as if trying to hold on to a pride that was slipping through his fingers. I knew this moment was not just legal justice. It was a psychological judgment for the child who thought he had the right to manipulate his mother. I took a deep breath and looked straight at him, my gaze unyielding, without a trace of softness. I saw every wrinkle on Ethan's forehead tighten, every bead of sweat forming on his temples, every hurried breath he could not hide. He began to realize that everything he had done, from siding with Lila, agreeing to sell the house, pretending not to know, to the lies he told to justify himself, was outright betrayal. And not just a betrayal of the law or property, but a betrayal of the person who gave him life, who had sacrificed her entire existence for him. "Ethan," my voice was deep, even but cold as steel. "I gave you this life, and this is how you repay me." He dared not look at me. In his eyes I saw fear, shame, and the painful anguish of realizing his wrongdoing. The years I had spent caring for him, protecting him, enduring silently, all of it now reflected back at him like a mirror he could not deny. He bowed his head, silent. But in that instant, I knew he was struggling within himself, between the maternal bond he had inadvertently broken and the overwhelming guilt rising uncontrollably. Lila stood there, seemingly waiting for Ethan's reaction, but I did not care. What mattered was my son's eyes, the moment he realized that the mother he once underestimated had become the absolute authority, and that any act against her would come with a price. Ethan collapsed before me, not with words, but with guilty silence. I stepped closer, slowly, each step deliberate, letting him feel the weight of truth. "Look at me, Ethan. Look me in the eye. This is the result of betrayal, of the choices you made. And now you must face yourself. Face the mistakes you've long refused to admit." My gaze pierced through every layer of pretense. He bowed his head, unable to look back. I knew this silence would haunt him, a constant reminder that every action, every choice carries consequences. In that moment, I felt a quiet pride. Martha Ellington, the mother once underestimated, now not only retained the house but restored her spiritual authority over her son. Ethan's shame was not just about losing control over property. It was the realization that he had betrayed the most important person in his life. I stood there, composed, yet every breath, every gesture conveyed a clear message. A mother cannot be deceived, cannot be manipulated, and will protect what is hers to the end. In that instant, Ethan completely crumbled. Lila panicked, but the key truth remained. My son had seen reality, and I knew from that moment on he would never underestimate me again. Ethan's downfall was not only personal justice, it was a lesson for the whole family. Love and family are not privileges to exploit, but responsibilities to honor. Ethan bowed his head, collapsing under the weight of his own guilt, eyes filled with regret, while I stood there, calm, steady, every breath controlled, yet charged with silent strength. The moment felt like victory was already mine, yet across from me, Lila still refused to let go. She stood, trembling, her face flushed red, eyes flickering with fear and anger, desperately searching for someone to blame, some excuse, anything to justify what she had done. But it was all just a performance. I listened as she forced out her words, her voice shaking, but full of excuses. "Ethan, it was you. The situation, Mom, everything was complicated. I had no other choice." She turned to blame my son, the circumstances, everything except herself. Every word she spilled sliced through the air like a dull blade, sharp in intention, but powerless against me. I saw it clearly. She had never truly cared for this family, had never truly loved us. The affection she pretended to nurture was only a mask, and now that mask was shattering under the harsh light of truth. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, letting Lila feel the weight of the truth she could no longer escape. "Lila," I said, my voice steady but sharp as steel. "I've heard enough excuses. You can blame Ethan. You can blame the situation. You can blame anyone you want, but there's one thing that doesn't change. Every action you took was your choice, and you must take responsibility for it. Lila stiffened, lips trembling with unfinished words. I saw the panic in her eyes, the sheer desperation, not because of the law, not because of the contract, but because for the first time she stood face to face with the unwavering gaze of a mother who had endured far too long. My eyes mirrored everything she had tried to hide: greed, deceit, and the lack of any true respect for my family. I lifted my hand, slowly gesturing around the house. This is not an object for you to use as you please. This is a family. This is the heart your father and I built with our lives. And you, I look straight at Lila, you never truly loved us. Not once. Lila swallowed hard, her whole body trembling, yet she still tried to defend herself. I didn't want you to misunderstand. I shook my head, my voice sinking, weighted with a lifetime of sacrifice. No, Lila, there's no misunderstanding here. I see everything, from the beginning to now, from your glances, your words, your actions. I saw it all. You never respected this family. You only wanted to take advantage of it. At that moment, the room felt like it shuddered under the weight of truth. Ethan remained silent, head lowered, too ashamed to intervene. And I realized that what I needed wasn't just to restore legal justice over my home, but to confront the truth about the people around me, to protect my family and myself. Lila's true face was exposed, and no excuse could shield her now. I stepped forward again, my steps firm as the beat of my own heart, and spoke to both Ethan and Lila. You need to understand one thing. Family is not a game you can manipulate. No one has the right to deceive. No one has the right to destroy what belongs to me and to your father. Whoever violates that will face the consequences. Ethan finally looked up, eyes filled with remorse and newfound clarity, while Lila stood frozen, trembling, forced for the first time to confront the truth that family love cannot be faked, and every scheme eventually comes to light. I let a small smile appear, quiet but powerful, because I knew, from this moment on, nothing could hide the truth any longer, and justice, silent but undeniable, was already on my side. After Lila's true face was exposed and every excuse stripped away, the room sank into a heavy silence, as if every breath were held under the weight of truth. Ethan kept his head bowed, eyes full of remorse, while Lila stood rigid, her face flushed and frozen. I stood between them, calm but unyielding, feeling each of their heartbeats, each trembling motion. From the beginning to the end, I had endured, been patient, listened, watched, and now it was time to lay down the final rule. No more bargaining, no retreat for any scheme. I placed my hand on the table and emphasized each word in a steady, ice-cold voice. You had the chance to be honest, to show love for this family, but everything's clear now, Ethan. You have realized your mistake, and Lila, you have shown your true face. You never once treated this family as important. I paused, letting each syllable ripple through the space, an invisible pressure they could not answer. So, I continued, looking them straight in the eye, I give you one last choice. Either you apologize sincerely, stop your plan to seize the house, the assets, and the family's affection at once, or I will not hesitate. I will sue, and you will taste legal consequences. Not only will you lose money, but you will lose trust, honor, and be utterly exposed before your own family. I could feel Lila's body trembling, each facial muscle twitching, words stuck in her throat. Ethan stood silent, sweat dropping to the floor, his eyes full of regret and fear. The room felt frozen. not by force of nature, but by the spiritual authority of a mother who had endured pain and betrayal and learned to turn that pain into strength. I emphasized each phrase. This is not an empty threat. I have prepared everything. I know the law, I have the evidence, and I am ready to defend what belongs to me to the end. Choose honesty or face the consequences. There is no third way. At that moment, Ethan looked up, his gaze sinking as his whole body seemed to melt under guilt and remorse. He realized that maternal love is not for exploitation, and that forgiveness must come with responsibility. Lila stood rigid, completely crushed by the choice she had never wanted to make. Confront the truth and accept responsibility, or submit to a glaring defeat before the mother she once scorned. I stepped closer, my voice still even but bearing an undeniable weight. I have endured long enough. I have observed. I have listened. I have given you chances. Now it is time to act. I will not only protect the property, but the dignity, honor, and values your father left behind. The choice is yours, but remember, my silence is not weakness. It is the sentence hanging over you. Each word, each gesture, each glance of mine created an invisible, irresistible pressure that made Ethan tremble and bow his head, and left Lila stunned, her eyes wide with panic. I knew this final lesson would not be forgotten. It would be engraved in their minds that any act of betrayal carries consequences, and a mother's quiet justice cannot be overturned. After I presented the final choice, the room remained silent, save for the steady ticking of the clock, a reminder that time waits for no one, and that every action must face its consequences. Ethan stood there, eyes clouded with fear and remorse, each drop of sweat falling to the wooden floor like undeniable signs of awakening within him. Lila remained stiff, her eyes wide, her throat seemingly choked by the words of apology she had never intended to speak. I looked straight at Ethan, saying nothing, letting him feel the weight of every decision he had made. No shouting, no scolding was needed. The power lay in silence, in a gaze that pierced through every lie and guilt. He bowed his head slightly, shoulders trembling, then slowly knelt before me. The sound of his kneeling echoed like an alarm for his conscience, a humble yet bitter signal that he had understood everything. The mother he once underestimated now stood before him, not only as the figure of maternal love, but as the embodiment of power and unwavering resolve. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, voice trembling, choked, each word spilling from the depths of his heart. No excuses, no justifications. I saw genuine regret, saw the transformation in the person I had once loved and trusted. Emotions surged within me, not satisfaction, but relief, as my son finally acknowledged his mistake and faced it with humility. Lila, standing beside him, remained completely silent. I looked at her and saw the bitterness, frustration, and failure seeping into every line of her face. She had been exposed, restrained by law and justice, but more importantly, she had been laid bare under the gaze of a mother who saw into her soul, where no forgiveness existed. Lila would never receive the mercy that my son was now being granted, and that truth fed her bitterness, trapping her in the failure she had orchestrated herself. I took a deep breath, sensing a quiet peace threading through the chaos and suffering we had endured. I didn't need to speak words of forgiveness. My eyes said it all. Ethan understood that I forgave, not out of weakness, but because maternal love has the power to reach the human conscience, to teach a son lessons of honesty, responsibility, and respect. Lila, on the other hand, faced the stark truth. My forgiveness was never meant for those who had never valued family, who had never cherished true affection. In that moment, I realized that revenge is not hatred. It is a testament to the clarity and power of a mother who has endured too much. I didn't need to shout, nor to act violently. My gaze and resolve were enough to serve as a warning, a boundary that no one could breach. Ethan knelt, seeking forgiveness, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true value of a mother, one who gave everything without calculation. Lila remained standing, silent and bitter. But that moment no longer held power for her. It had become an unforgettable lesson. Deceit, ambition, and scheming will always be exposed under the light of truth and justice. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of justice coursing through every cell, knowing that at last the family was protected, and the power and dignity of the mother had been restored. After Ethan knelt and apologized, the house fell into another kind of silence, this time the silence of release. I stood between those who had dared to belittle and test my dignity, feeling each steady breath of my own, strong, composed, and full of power. There was no need to shout or threaten further. Everyone already understood that true strength does not come from force, but from clarity and inner authority. Ethan bowed his head, eyes filled with remorse and the lesson learned, while Lila stood there, bitter and tense, realizing that her only escape was to change her whole way of life or leave the family she had never truly respected. I walked into the living room, my eyes sweeping across the family photos, the marks of the past my husband and I had nurtured. Every brick, every frame told the story of love, sacrifice, and tireless effort to build a home. Now the house was more than shelter. It was a symbol of victory, justice, and a dignity that could not be bought or manipulated. I understood that this protection was not only for me, but also for Ethan, so he would learn that power is not granted by ambition, but earned through responsibility, honesty, and respect. Lila stood beside him, tension etched on her face, eyes frantic. She had once thought that by seizing, lying, and exploiting my perceived weakness she would win. But every calculation failed. My gaze, calm but resolute, had exposed every scheme. She fell silent, bitter, but I needed no excuses or pleas. My strength lay in lucidity, not hatred. And that was what made Lila bow her head to the truth. There was no turning back. Ethan looked at me with a new respect, a costly lesson about motherhood, about how a mother can turn pain, betrayal, and injustice into extraordinary strength. He understood that I was not only protecting property, but preserving the integrity of the family, honor, and spiritual values that money could not buy. I smiled quietly, realizing that now Ethan had matured, not only in years, but by experience, by the awakening from the shock he had endured. I walked through the house, my hand touching every wooden surface, every scar time had left. Each grain, each mark witnessed the past, the fights, the silent tears, and the quiet strength I had accumulated over the years. I knew that today's victory was not born of hatred, but of clarity, of the ability to wait and to know my own worth. Lila was finally forced to choose, change her life or leave ours. She stood there, silent and bitter, but I no longer cared about her decisions. I had closed the circle of hatred by protecting my family, keeping the house, the assets, and my dignity, and by creating a firm boundary that no one could cross. I stood on the stair, looking out at the woods surrounding the house, listening to leaves rustle and the wind pass through the windows. My heart felt light, and in that moment I knew the battle had ended, not with tears, not with hatred, but with the clarity and inner strength of a mother who had been trampled and betrayed, yet never conquered.